Welcome back. Today we're going to read Chapter 3 of King, Warrior, Magician, Lover, at least get started with it, on boy psychology. The drug dealer, the duckling, and the diving political leader, the wife beater, the chronically crabby boss, the hotshot junior executive, the unfaithful husband, the company yes man, the indifferent graduate school advisor, the holier-than-thou minister, the gang member, the father who can never find the time to attend his daughter's school programs, the coach who ridicules his star athletes, the therapist who unconsciously attacks his clients, the yuppie. All these men have something in common. They are all boys pretending to be men. They got that way, honestly, because nobody showed them what a mature man is like. Their kind of manhood is a pretense to manhood that goes largely undetected, as such, by most of us. We are continually mistaking this man's controlling, threatening, and hostile behaviors for strength. In reality, he is showing an underlying extreme vulnerability and weakness, the vulnerability of the wounded boy. The devastating fact is that most men are fixated at an immature level of development. These early developmental levels are governed by inner blueprints appropriate to boyhood. When they are allowed to rule what should be adulthood, when the archetypes of boyhood are not built upon and transcended by the ego's appropriate accessing of the archetypes of mature masculinity, they cause us to act out of our hidden, to us, but seldom to others, boyishness. We often talk with affection about boyishness in our culture. The truth is that the boy in each of us, when he is in his appropriate place in our lives, is the source of playfulness, of pleasure, of fun, of energy, of a kind of open-mindedness that is ready for adventure and for the future. But there is another kind of boyishness that remains infantile in our interactions within ourselves and with others when manhood is required. The structure of the archetypes. Each of the archetypal energy potentials in the male psyche, in both its immature and its mature forms, has a triune or three-part structure. At the top of the triangle is the archetype in its fullness. At the bottom of the triangle, the archetype is experienced in what we call a bipolar dysfunctional or shadow form. In both its immature and mature forms, that is, in both boy psychology and man psychology terms, this bipolar dysfunction can be thought of as immature in that it represents a psychological condition that is not integrated or cohesive. Lack of cohesion in the psyche is always a symptom of inadequate development. As the personality of the boy and then the man matures into its appropriate stage of development, the poles of these shadow forms become integrated and unified. Some boys seem more mature than others. They are accessing, no doubt, unconsciously, the archetypes of boyhood more fully than are their peers. These boys have achieved the level of integration and inner unity that others have not. Other boys may seem more immature, even taking into account the natural immaturity of boyhood. For example, it is right for a boy to feel the heroic within himself, to see himself as a hero. But many boys cannot do this and become caught in the bipolar shadow forms of the hero, the grandstander bully or the coward. Different archetypes come online at different developmental stages. The first archetype of the immature masculine to power up is the divine child. The precocious child and the edible child are next. The last stage of boyhood is governed by the hero. Human development does not always proceed so neatly. There are mixtures of the archetypal influences all along the way. Interestingly, each of the archetypes of boy psychology gives rise in a complex way to each of the archetypes of mature masculinity. The boy is father to the man. Thus, the divine child, modulated and enriched by life's experiences, becomes the king. The precocious child becomes the magician, the Oedipal child becomes the lover, and the hero becomes the warrior. The four archetypes of boyhood, each with a triangular structure, can be put together to form a pyramid that depicts the structure of the boy's emerging identity, his immature masculine self. The same is true of the structure of the mature masculine self. As we have suggested, the adult man does not lose his boyishness, and the archetypes that form boyhood's foundation do not go away. Since archetypes cannot disappear, the mature man transcends the masculine powers of boyhood, building upon them rather than demolishing them. The resulting structure of the mature masculine self, therefore, is a pyramid over a pyramid. Though images should not be taken too literally, we are arguing that pyramids are universal symbols of the human self. Footnote: we theorize that the self-structure in women is also pyramidal in form, and that when the pyramids of the masculine self and the feminine self are placed end to end, they form an octahedron, an image that graphically represents the Jungian self, which embraces both masculine and feminine qualities. See C.G. Jung's Aeon, translated by R.F.C. Hull, Bollingen Series 20. We have gone beyond Jung in decoding the double quaternio. The divine child. The first, the most primal of the immature masculine energies is the divine child. We are all familiar with the Christian story of the birth of the baby Jesus. He is a mystery. He comes from the divine realm, born of a virgin woman. Miraculous things and events attend him. The star, the worshipping shepherds, the wise men from Persia. Surrounded by his worshippers, he occupies the central place not only in the stable, but in the universe. Even the animals in popular Christmas songs attend him. In the pictures, he radiates light, haloed by the soft, glistening straw he lies upon. Because he is God, he is almighty. At the same time, he is totally vulnerable and helpless. No sooner is he born than the evil King Herod sniffs him out and seeks to kill him. He must be protected and spirited away to Egypt until he can be strong enough to begin his life's work and until the forces that would destroy him have spent their energy. What is not often realized is that this myth does not stand alone. The religions of the world are rich with stories of the miraculous baby boy. The Christian story itself is modeled in part on the story of the birth of the great Persian prophet Zoroaster, complete with miracles in nature, magi, and threats on his life. In Judaism, there is the story of the baby Moses, born to be the deliverer of his people, to be the great teacher and the mediator between God and human beings. He was raised as a prince of Egypt, and yet in his first days his life was threatened by an edict from the Pharaoh, and he was placed helpless and vulnerable in a reed basket and set adrift on the Nile. The model for this story was the much older legend of the infancy of the great Mesopotamian king Sargon of Akkad. And from all over the world, we hear legends about the wondrous infancy of the baby Buddha, the baby Krishna, the baby Dionysus. Even less known is that this figure of the divine baby boy, universal in our religions, is also universal inside ourselves. This can be seen from the dreams of men in psychoanalysis who frequently, especially as they start to get better, dream about a baby boy who fills the dream with light and joy, and a sense of wonder and refreshment. Often, too, when a man in therapy starts to feel better, the urge comes to him, perhaps for the first time in his life, to have children. These events are signals that something new and creative, fresh and innocent, is being born within him. A new phase of his life is beginning. Creative parts of himself that he had been unconscious of are now thrusting upward into awareness. He is experiencing new life. But whenever the divine child within us makes itself known, attack from the Herods, within and without, is not far behind. New life, including new psychological life, is always fragile. When we feel this new energy manifesting within us, we need to move to protect it, because it is going to be attacked. A man may say in his therapy, "I may actually be getting better." And right away, he may be answered by an inner voice that says, "Oh, no, you're not. You know you can never be well." It is then time to get the fragile divine child to Egypt. Picking up on the theme in the Christmas story of the adoring animals and the angels' proclamation of peace on earth, we can see in the Greek myth of Orpheus that the divine child is the archetypal energy that prefigures the mature masculine energy of the king. The man god Orpheus sits at the center of the world playing his lyre and singing a song that brings all the animals of the forest to him. They are drawn by the song, prey and predator, and they come together around Orpheus in perfect harmony. Their differences resolved, all of the opposites brought together into a world transcending order, characteristic functions of the king, as we shall see. But this theme of the divine child bringing peace and order to the whole world, including the animal world, and animals, looked at psychologically, stand for our often conflicting instincts, is not limited to ancient myths. A young man who entered analysis once told us a story about an unusual event in his childhood. When he was probably 5 or 6 years old, he told us he went out into his backyard one spring afternoon, yearning for something he was too young to identify, but that upon reflection later in life, he saw was a yearning for inner peace and harmony and a sense of oneness with all things. He stood with his back to a huge oak tree which grew in his yard, and he began to sing a song he made up as he went along. It was hypnotic for him. He sang his longing, he sang his sadness, and he sang a kind of minor key, deep joy. He sang a song of compassion for all living things. It was a kind of self and other soothing lullaby, a song to the baby boy. And pretty soon he began to notice that birds were coming to the tree, a few at a time. He continued singing, and as he sang, more birds came, whirling and circling around the tree and alighting in its branches. At last the tree was filled with birds. It was alive with them. It seemed to him that he had been lured by the beauty and compassion of his song. They confirmed his beauty and answered his yearning. By coming to adore him, the tree became a tree of life, and refreshed by his confirmation of his inner divine child, he could go on. The divine child archetype that appears in our myths as Orpheus, as Christ, as the infant Moses, and as various figures in the myths of many religions, in the dreams of men undergoing therapy, and in the actual experiences of boys, appears to be in the hard wiring of us all. We seem to be born with it. It goes by many names and is evaluated differently by the different schools of psychology. Usually, psychologists condemn it and, in effect, try to disconnect their clients from it. The important thing is to see that the divine child is built into us as a primal pattern of the immature masculine. Freud talked about it as the id, the it. He saw it as the primitive or infantile drives, amoral, forceful, and full of godlike pretensions. It was the underlying push of impersonal nature itself, concerned only with satisfying the unlimited needs of the child. The psychologist Alfred Adler talked about it as the hidden power drive in each of us. as the hidden superiority complex that covers our real sense of vulnerability, weakness, and inferiority. Remember, the divine child is both all-powerful, the center of the universe, and at the same time, totally helpless and weak. In fact, it is the actual experience of infants. Heinz Kohut, who developed what he called self-psychology, talks about it as the grandiose self-organization, which is demanding of ourselves and others in ways that can never be fulfilled. The most recent psychoanalytic theory suggests that people who are possessed or identified with this infantile grandiosity are expressing a narcissistic personality disorder. The followers of Carl Jung, however, view this divine child differently. They do not see it in largely pathological terms. Jungians believe that the divine child is a vital aspect of the archetypal self, the self with a capital S. Because it is different from the ego, which is the self with a small s. For Jungians, this divine child within us is the source of life. It possesses magical, empowering qualities, and getting in touch with it produces an enormous sense of well-being, enthusiasm for life, and great peace and joy, as it did for the young boy under the oak tree. These differing schools of psychoanalysis, we believe, are each right. Each picks up on the two different aspects of this energy, the one integrated and unified, and the other the shadow side. At the top of the triangular archetypal structure, we experience the divine child, who renews us and keeps us young at heart. At the base of the triangle, we experience what we call the high chair tyrant and the weakling prince. The high chair tyrant. The high chair tyrant is epitomized by the image of little Lord Fauntleroy sitting in his high chair, banging his spoon on the tray, and screaming for his mother to feed him, kiss him, and attend him. Like a dark version of the Christ child, he is the center of the universe. Others exist to meet his all-powerful needs and desires. But when the food comes, it often does not meet his specifications. It's not good enough. It's not the right kind. It's too hot or too cold, too sweet or too sour. So he spits it on the floor or throws it across the room. If he becomes sufficiently self-righteous, no food, no matter how hungry he is, will be adequate. And if his mother picks him up after failing him so completely, he will scream and twist and reject her advances because they were not offered at exactly the right moment. The high chair tyrant hurts himself with his grandiosity, the limitlessness of his demands, because he rejects the very things that he needs for life, food and love. Characteristics of the high chair tyrant include arrogance, what the Greeks called hubris or overweening pride, childishness in the negative sense, and irresponsibility, even to himself as a mortal infant who has to meet his biological and psychological needs. All of this is what psychologists call inflation, or pathological narcissism. The high chair tyrant needs to learn that he is not the center of the universe, and that the universe does not exist to fulfill his every need, or better put, his limitless needs, his pretensions to godhood. It will nurture him, but not in his form as God. The high chair tyrant, through the shadow king, may continue to be a ruling archetypal influence in adulthood. We all know the story of the promising leader, the CEO, or the presidential candidate who starts to rise to great prominence and then shoots himself in the foot. He sabotages his success and crashes to the earth. The ancient Greeks said that hubris is always followed by nemesis. The gods always bring down those mortals who get too arrogant, demanding, or inflated. Icarus, for instance, made wings of feathers and wax in order to fly like the birds, read gods, and then his inflation, against his father's warning, flew too close to the sun. The sun melted the wax disintegrated, and he plummeted into the sea. We are familiar with the saying, power corrupts, and absolute power corrupts absolutely. King Louis XVI of France lost his head because of his arrogance. Often, as we men rise in the corporate structure, as we gain more and more authority and power, the risk of self-destruction also rises. The boss who wants only yes men, who doesn't want to know what's going on, the president who doesn't want to hear his general's advice, the school principal who can't tolerate criticism from his teachers, all are men possessed by the high-chair tyrant riding for a fall. The high-chair tyrant who attacks his human host is the perfectionist. He expects the impossible of himself and berates himself, just as his mother did, when he can't meet the demands of the infant within. The tyrant pressures a man for more and better performance and is never satisfied with what he produces. The unfortunate man becomes the slave, as the mother was, of the grandiose 2-year-old inside of him. He has to have more material things. He can't make mistakes. And because he can't possibly meet the demands of the inner tyrant, he develops ulcers and gets sick. He can't, in the end, stand up to the unrelenting pressure. We men often deal with the tyrant by having a heart attack. We go on strike against him. Finally, the only way to escape the little lord is to die. When the high-chair tyrant cannot be brought under control, he will manifest in a Stalin, Caligula, or Hitler, all malignant sociopaths. He will become the CEO who would rather see the company fail than deal with our own grandiosity, our own identification with the demanding God within. We can be little Hitlers, but we're going to destroy our country in the process. It has been said that the divine child wants just to be and to have all things flow toward him. He does not want to do. The artist wants to be admired without having to lift a finger. The CEO wants to sit in his office enjoying his leather chairs, his cigars, and his attractive secretaries, drawing his high salary and enjoying his perks. But he does not want to do anything for the company. He imagines himself invulnerable and all-important. He often demeans and degrades others who are trying to accomplish something. He is in his high chair. He is setting himself to get the axe. The weakling prince. The other side of the bipolar shadow of the divine child is the weakling prince. The boy, and later the man, who is possessed by the weakling prince appears to have very little personality, no enthusiasm for life, and very little initiative. This is the boy who needs to be coddled, who dictates to those around him by his silence or his whining and complaining helplessness. He needs to be carried around on a pillow. Everything is too much for him. He rarely joins in children's games. He has few friends. He doesn't do well in school. He is frequently hypochondriacal. His slightest wish is his parents' command. The entire family system revolves around his comfort. He reveals the dishonesty of his helplessness, however, in his dagger-like verbal assaults on his siblings, his biting sarcasm directed against them, and his patent manipulation of their feelings. Because he has convinced his parents that he is a helpless victim of life and that others are picking on him. When a controversy arises between himself and a sibling, his parents tend to punish the sibling and excuse him. The weakling prince is the polar opposite of the high-chair tyrant, and though he rarely throws the tantrums of the tyrant, he nonetheless occupies a less easily detectable throne. As is the case with all bipolar disorders, the ego possessed by one pole will from time to time gradually slide or suddenly jump over to the other pole. Using the imagery of bipolar magnetism to describe this phenomenon, we can say that the polarity of the magnet reverses depending on the direction of an electrical current passing through it. When such a reversal occurs in the boy caught in the bipolar shadow of the divine child, he will switch from tyrannical outbursts to depressed passivity, or from apparent weakness to rageful displays. Accessing the divine child. In order to access the divine child appropriately, we need to acknowledge him, but not identify with him. We need to love and admire the creativity and beauty of his primal aspect, of the masculine self. Because if we don't have this connection with him, we are never going to see the possibilities in life. We are never going to seize opportunities for newness and freshness. Whether activist, artist, administrator, or teacher, everyone in a leadership capacity needs to be connected with the creative, playful child in order to manifest his full potential and advance his cause, his company, and generativity and creativity in himself and others. Connection with this archetype keeps us from feeling washed up, bored, and unable to see the abundance of human potential all around us. We have said that therapists often depreciate the grandiose self within their clients. Although it is necessary at times for clients to gain emotional and cognitive distance from the divine child, we ourselves have not encountered many men, at least among those who seek therapy, who identify with their creativity. Rather, they usually need to get in touch with it. We want to encourage greatness in men. We want to encourage ambition. We believe that nobody really wants to be sort of gray normal. Often, the definition of normal is average. We live, it seems to us, in an age under the curse of normalcy, characterized by the elevation of the mediocre. It seems likely that therapists who persistently depreciate the shining of the grandiose self in their clients are themselves split off from their own divine child. They are envying the beauty and freshness, the creativity and vitality of the child in their clients. The ancient Romans believed that every human baby is born with what they called his or her genius, a guardian spirit assigned at birth. Roman birthday parties were held not so much to honor an individual as to honor that person's genius, the divine being that came into the world with him or her. The Romans knew that it was not the man's ego that was the source of his music, his art, his statecraft, or his courageous deeds. It was the divine child, an aspect of the self within him. We need to ask ourselves two questions. The first one is not whether we are manifesting the high chair tyrant or the weakling prince, but how. Because we are all manifesting both to some extent and in some form. At the very least, we all do this when we regress into our child, when we are fatigued or extremely frightened. The second question is not whether the creative child exists in us, but how we are honoring him or not honoring him. If we're not feeling him in our personal lives and in our work, then we have to ask ourselves how we are blocking him. That concludes our reading for today, a little longer than the other ones. When we get together next time, we'll finish the next section of Chapter 3 on the precocious child.